This unmarried man is society's greatest, most subtle threat. He is 35 years old, possessing a competence that borders on ruthlessness in his professional life. His bank accounts reflect a disciplined mastery of the material world, and his personal life is characterized by genuine friendships and deep self-directed pursuits. He is whole. He is complete. He walks into a gathering, perhaps a social event or a mandated family gathering, and the air around him shifts subtly, charged with unspoken expectation. He is the anomaly, the loose thread in the tightly woven tapestry of modern conformity. His success is undeniable, his charisma is evident, yet there is one thing, according to the collective subconscious of everyone present, that is missing. The question, delivered often with a mixture of false concern and underlying irritation, is inevitable. When are you getting married? But here is the fascinating point, the hinge upon which the psychological drama turns. He does not falter. He does not become defensive, resorting to tired excuses about career demands or poor timing. He simply articulates his truth, a truth so stark and radical that it freezes the listener in a moment of existential discomfort. He says calmly and definitively, "I don't need to." That response, the pure, unadulterated declaration of self-sufficiency, is terrifying. It is not just uncomfortable, it is fundamentally disruptive to the established social contract. Why does a man who genuinely does not require the anchor of marriage, who thrives perfectly well in his singularity, scare society so profoundly? Because he is living proof that everything you, I, and the rest of the collective have been told about what makes a man valuable, complete, and respectable might be an elaborate generational lie. Consider the programming. From the moment the masculine identity begins to form, men are inoculated with a potent, simple message. Get married, settle down, establish a family, find a wife. This is the definition of stability. This is the hallmark of the real man. This process is often framed as the natural progression toward personal fulfillment. But what if that narrative is not actually about your happiness, your fulfillment, or your love? What if the entire function of that narrative is to keep you predictable, contained, and most importantly, controllable? The chilling truth is that a married man, particularly the traditional provider, is a man who is inherently controlled. He operates under a massive burden of responsibility, tethered by financial obligations, mortgage payments, the necessity of providing constant provision, and the emotional ecosystem of his family unit. He cannot simply stand up, quit his stable but soul-crushing job, and travel the world seeking authentic experience. He cannot take extreme risks, professional or philosophical, because the safety net beneath him has been repurposed to catch others. He stays in line. He obeys the system. The unmarried man who has achieved genuine self-sufficiency, however, is qualitatively dangerous. His threat is not that he hates women or rejects the possibility of relationship. His threat is his absolute, uncompromised freedom. And freedom, true interior freedom, is the most contagious pathogen in the world. When other men observe him flourishing, not just surviving but actively thriving, without the expected scaffolding of a wife, they begin to ask profoundly dangerous, system-threatening questions. Do I really need this structure? Am I married because I desperately wanted to be? Or because the internal monologue supplied by society told me that I should be? The great philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche spoke extensively about individuals who possess the courage to create their own rules, to define their own worth, refusing the inheritance of external values. He envisioned them as the Übermensch, the overman, not a biologically superior being, but a man who has overcome the limitations of his own conditioning. They do not need the approval of the crowd to validate their existence. Correspondingly, the depth psychologist Carl Jung confirmed that when a man undertakes the process of individuation, truly knowing and integrating all aspects of his own psyche, including his dark, powerful, and often antisocial shadow, he becomes psychologically complete within himself. He ceases to be a half-person looking for a missing half. He does not require someone else to make him whole. This man is not anti-marriage. He is fundamentally pro-choice. Not the fake binary choice society offers, marry or be a failure, but the genuine, powerful choice. I can marry from a position of profound strength because I desire it, or I can remain single because I am already perfectly complete. That profound and authentic choice is the thing that terrifies a world fundamentally built on the foundation of your manufactured neediness. Before we dive deeper into the ancient psychological architecture that confirms this, I want to acknowledge the global scale of this conversation. This idea of the self-sufficient man is universal. Take a moment right now and anchor this discussion to your reality. Let me know in the comments exactly what city you are tuning in from. Are you ready to discover the mechanisms by which your supposed incompleteness has been manufactured? Then prepare yourself, because by the time we finish this exploration, you won't just think differently about relationships and societal expectations. You will feel fundamentally different about your own self-worth and independence. Here is a realization that has the potential to shatter years of inherited belief. You have been systematically programmed to believe you are inherently broken. Reflect deeply on your childhood and adolescent exposure to media, family expectations, and cultural narratives. What was the persistent, ubiquitous message drilled into your masculine psyche? You need to find your other half. You are emotionally deficient or structurally incomplete without a partner. The narrative is, a real man settles down. What if this ingrained belief is precisely the state of mind the system requires you to maintain? Nietzsche, in his scathing critique of institutionalized ethics, termed this mental state slave morality. This is the idea, embraced by the collective and propagated by the weak, that you are inherently deficient, defective, and therefore, you require external validation, external rescue, and external completion, in the form of a relationship or status, to achieve worthiness. It is a truly brilliant mechanism of control. If you sincerely believe you are incomplete, you will spend your entire life desperately trying to fill that perceived void. And what is the operational consequence of this desperation? A man who is perpetually seeking completion is a man whose movements, spending habits, and life decisions can be predicted and, crucially, controlled by external pressures and promises. The hidden psychological truth, the one Jung uncovered, is that there is an essential countersexual part of your psyche, what he termed the anima, your inner feminine energy, intuition, emotional depth, capacity for connection and nurturing. Society, however, conditions you to believe you must project this internal energy onto women, externalizing your emotional life, instead of undertaking the difficult necessary task of developing and integrating it within yourself. Why does society demand this projection? Because when you successfully integrate this inner feminine, when you become psychologically and emotionally whole on your own terms, you transcend the need for the external provider of emotional completeness. The man who discovers this self-integration becomes dangerous. Not violently dangerous, but psychologically unmanipulatable. He cannot be shamed into marriage because his worth is internal. He cannot be guilted into settling down because his choices are sovereign. He cannot be manipulated through the societal fear of loneliness because he has befriended his solitude. Observe the immediate reaction of the collective when you declare, not aggressively but simply as a statement of fact, that you do not require marriage to be complete. They become angry. They become defensive. They instantly launch into a litany of reasons why you are wrong, why you will be miserable later, and why your independence is a flawed delusion. But what you are witnessing is not a critique of your life. It is the defensive lashing out of people whose entire worldview is threatened. If you can achieve psychological completeness without following the script, what does that say about the compromises, the sacrifices, and the unconscious choices they made to adhere to that same script? The profound shift occurs when you cease seeking external validation, stop projecting your completeness onto others, and begin the arduous work of building internal, unshakable strength. At that moment, you transform from someone who desperately needs relationships to someone who consciously chooses them. And choice, freely executed from a position of internal abundance, is what they are truly afraid of. Because a man who chooses from strength has the terrifying absolute power to choose to walk away, and that power fundamentally destabilizes a system built on keeping you eternally dependent. Let me reveal a core secret that should invoke a righteous anger within you. Your deep recurring feelings of incompleteness, that nagging sense that something critical is missing from your life, are not biologically natural or inevitable. They are meticulously manufactured. There is a colossal, multi-trillion-dollar apparatus built entirely upon the foundation of your insecurity and the persistent feeling of inadequacy without a partner. The wedding industry alone is $250 billion annually, but that is merely the surface. The deeper architecture of control involves real estate companies, which optimize marketing toward couples because joint incomes enable larger mortgages and increased spending. Insurance companies create intricate family plans because married men, responsible for others, buy exponentially more coverage. The entire consumer economy, from luxury cars and large homes to constant upgrade cycles, is structurally built around the idea that you need to provide for someone else, or that you need external status to attract someone else. But here is the devastating clarity the self-sufficient man achieves. He sees right through this manipulation. He realizes that a vast majority of his ambition and his spending was driven by the imperative to prove he was provider material, a worthy, stable, and marriageable asset. The expensive watch, the unnecessary upgrade to the bigger apartment, the elaborate performance of success. All of it was driven by a need for external performance, not by genuine self-directed desire. Nietzsche spoke about the will to power. Most misunderstand this concept as mere power over others. But the highest form of the will to power is the ruthless power over yourself, the ability to define your life's purpose independent of external demands. When you successfully redirect the potent energy that was once wasted on impressing others, and focus it entirely on developing your authentic inner self, something magnificent happens. You stop consuming out of insecurity, desperation, or projected need. and start living from a place of pure, quiet authenticity. Think honestly about your last major purchase. Was it driven by a genuine internal value? Or was it subconsciously motivated by the calculation that it would make you marginally more attractive, stable, or desirable to a potential partner? The man who has successfully integrated his psychology, what Jung termed individuation, makes his life decisions based on his actual core values, unpolluted by manufactured needs. And this autonomy is precisely what terrifies the economic machine. If men collectively stopped buying things to impress women, if they halted the expensive upgrade cycle designed to showcase their provider status, if they ceased consuming to fill the manufactured void of incompleteness, the entire economy would face a catastrophic reorganization. It would have to shift from selling people what they think they need to survive socially, to selling people what they genuinely, authentically want. That is why the constant barrage of media and social messaging continues to tell you that you are deficient and incomplete. Your insecurity is the central pillar of their profit margin. There is a potent, vital aspect of your being that virtually no one discusses openly, and society is profoundly terrified of what happens when you finally embrace it. Jung called it the shadow, the repository of all the parts of yourself you were taught to hide, suppress, or feel shame over. What are the components of the masculine shadow? Your radical selfishness, your fierce independence, your unwillingness to conform to the group's demands, your primal desire to ruthlessly put your own development and fulfillment first. Most men spend their entire lives engaged in a desperate, exhausting flight from these powerful aspects of themselves. They often enter marriage partly as a visible social proof that they are good guys, reliable partners, and capable of profound self-sacrificing behavior. But here is the transformative paradox. Embracing and integrating your shadow is the fundamental key to achieving true psychological completeness. The man who possesses no need for marriage has done the terrifying inner work most men avoid. He has faced his own dark side with relentless, uncompromising honesty. He has acknowledged, yes, I can be intensely selfish about my time and focus. Yes, I value my independence above almost all else. Yes, I am not always willing to sacrifice my highest vision for the comfort of others. And instead of being immobilized by shame over these qualities, he has integrated them, turning them from liabilities into tools of sovereign action. Here is the wild consequence. When you stop running from your shadow, you immediately cease needing external validation or moral certification. You are no longer performing goodness to prove you are worthy of love or belonging. You simply are. You are whole. There is another critical piece of Jung's psychological map, the anima, the internal feminine energy. Most men, as programmed, project this onto women, operating under the myth that she completes me. But when you integrate the anima within yourself, you become psychically whole. You no longer need an external woman to access your deep emotional side, your intuition, your capacity for nurturing or creative flow. You have cultivated and mastered these qualities within your own internal landscape. This mastery is the essence of Nietzsche's amor fati, the fierce, joyful love of fate. You accept your complete, multifaceted nature, including the potent parts society told you were unacceptable. And when you achieve this, something incredible and essential happens. You become immune to external manipulation. Society cannot shame you into marriage because you are not ashamed of your singularity. They cannot guilt you into providing because you feel no guilt about prioritizing your own authentic development. You have become psychologically free, and that freedom witnessed by others is profoundly contagious. Other men watch you and the dangerous question arises in their own minds. Wait, I can be whole on my own? Picture two archetypal men standing at the crossroads of modern life. First, the tamed man. Structured, entirely predictable, safe. He possesses a mortgage, a wife, a 5-year plan for his career, and a neatly defined path. This man embodies what Nietzsche called the Apollonian principle, representing order, rigid structure, and conscious control. Second, the wild man. Unpredictable, creatively volatile, free. He can pivot his entire career on a whim, change continents at a moment's notice, and takes philosophical and financial risks with impunity. This man embodies the Dionysian principle, representing chaos, passion, and authentic, explosive expression. Now, guess which one society overwhelmingly prefers? Here is the strategic function of the institution. Marriage is fundamentally designed to channel and transform Dionysian energy into Apollonian predictability. It domesticates the wild impulse. The man's creative, chaotic energy is funneled into socially acceptable forms, usually the relentless grind of providing. His fierce independence is systematically transformed into the obligation of responsibility. But what happens to the man who refuses this domestication, who does not need the institution to validate his existence? He retains his edge. He maintains his primal, unpredictable freedom. Think about the sheer, radical freedom of this man. Can you quit your job tomorrow and vanish into the Andes to write a book? Can you entirely pivot your life's direction, without having to consider and negotiate the needs, desires, and emotional stability of a dependent spouse and children? Can you access your creative chaos whenever the impulse strikes, without the need for structured domestic scheduling? If you are married, the honest answer is almost certainly no, and that loss of radical flexibility is precisely the point. The unmarried man who has successfully achieved Jung's individuation has done something extraordinary. He has integrated both sides of the coin. He can be structured and financially disciplined when necessary, and utterly wild and creative when beneficial. He is capable of being responsible when required, and rebelliously unconventional when true expression demands it. He is the gentleman at the dinner table and the ruthless competitive warrior in the marketplace. He is the nurturer to his friends and the boundary enforcer to his enemies. He is not trapped in either rigid extreme. Society fears this integration because it is ultimately uncontrollable and therefore unpredictable. The traditional married man often loses access to his Dionysian nature, becoming purely Apollonian, safe, predictable, and managed. But the integrated bachelor retains his essential wildness while developing his wisdom. This profound operational flexibility makes him incredibly potent, and power that cannot be contained or predicted is power that actively threatens the structure of the system. Here is the central question that can change everything about how you view your life choices. Who exactly decided that marriage was a universal, mandatory prerequisite for a complete, successful life? Think about the source of this rule. Trace back the lineage of the standards defining a successful man. They come from inherited societal norms, religious doctrines, generational expectations, and pervasive media representations. But what if all those stringent rules are, in reality, nothing more than strongly held, widely repeated opinions? Nietzsche conceptualized the Übermensch not as a morally superior entity, but as a person who possesses the strength to create their own ethical framework and define their own values, rather than meekly inheriting those of the crowd. The man who feels no intrinsic need for marriage is living, breathing proof that this radical self-creation is possible. His position is not a simple rejection of the institution itself, but a fierce rejection of the idea that it is mandatory. Do you see the critical difference? Most men evaluate marriage under the framework of inherited values. I should get married because that is what successful, responsible men do. The value-creating man, the individuated man, uses an entirely different framework. Does this specific relationship and institution serve my highest, most authentic development and desires? It may result in the same decision, but the fundamental structure of his existence is radically different. And this is the core threat to the system. If you can successfully create your own self-defined values around marriage, what other social, economic, or behavioral rules are actually just suggestions that you are choosing to obey? Jung's entire process of individuation is dedicated to the arduous work of becoming who you truly are, not the highly modified and acceptable self society demands you be. Once you complete this process, you gain the internal capacity to evaluate every single life choice, including partnership, based on the demands of your authentic self, rather than the dictates of social programming. Imagine if every man applied Nietzsche's ultimate ethical test to his marriage, the test of eternal recurrence. Make choices as if you will be forced to repeat them infinitely for all time. How many marriages entered into out of fear, obligation, or neediness would survive that test of infinitely repeated authentic choice? The man who has mastered his internal landscape and requires no external validation has already passed this test. He has looked at his life with ruthless honesty and decided, I would rather embrace profound solitude and absolute freedom than settle for less than a genuine, growth-fostering connection. This stance is never anti-relationship. It is always and fundamentally pro-authentic choice. When you observe a man who has forged his own values, who lives by his own sovereign standards, and who measures success by internal, not external metrics, you are witnessing something staggeringly rare, authentic human freedom. And that level of freedom is so potent, so attractive, and so spiritually inspiring that it forces others to confront the compromises they made in their own lives. That is why he is deemed dangerous. He is not actively seeking to destroy society. He is simply showing by his very existence that alternative, sovereign ways of living are not just possible, but potentially superior. Let us consider a quick, uncomfortable question. How much of your daily interaction, motivation, and decision-making is pure performance? Jung drew a rigid distinction between the persona, the mask you wear in public, the curated identity required by your professional and social roles, and your authentic, innermost self. Most men expend staggering amounts of energy performing a rigid, often exhausting version of masculinity, eventually forgetting what their true, independent desires even are. The societal persona of masculinity dictates, real men get married. Real men are tireless providers. Real men sacrifice their own ambitions for the sake of the collective. But what if your deepest, authentic self desires something radically different? The man who has no intrinsic need for partnership has dedicated himself to the crucial, hard work of distinguishing between these two aspects of his existence. He has asked the terrifying necessary question, am I living my life or am I dutifully performing society's script? Most men marry specifically to fulfill the demands of the persona. They operate from the belief, this is what I am supposed to do to be considered whole or successful. But they fail to ever ask, is this what I actually want? The individuated man has navigated what Jung referred to as the dark night of the soul. Periods of intense isolation, ruthless self-examination, and profound existential questioning that most people actively avoid through constant, frantic activity, endless serial relationships, and perpetual, low-level distraction. And through that necessary internal darkness, he discovers the revolutionary truth. He can be completely and utterly whole without any external validation or scaffolding. Think about this honestly. When was the last time you executed a major life decision? A move, a career pivot, a large financial choice, based purely on what you wanted, uninfluenced by what others expected you to want? The authentic man lives from his genuine core desires, not from manufactured needs. He may eventually choose marriage, but he will choose it from a position of overwhelming strength, not weakness. He chooses it from wholeness, never from neediness. Everything you were taught about the inevitable functioning of life and relationships is rapidly, visibly collapsing. Nietzsche prophetically announced the death of God, which was not merely a theological statement, but a declaration of the collapse of the foundational, traditional authority structures that once rigidly dictated how people must live, love, and order their societies. Nowhere is the seismic impact of this collapse more evident than in the institution of marriage. Your grandfather, or perhaps your great-grandfather, married because he had to. The choice was virtually non-existent. The pressures were insurmountable. Intense social pressure, harsh economic necessity, unbreakable religious obligation, and a complete lack of safe, acceptable alternatives. The decision was made for him by the collective unconscious. But you, living in this moment, are perhaps the first generation in history who can truly, universally choose. And that absolute freedom of choice is what sends tremors of fear through the old social order. Consider the ramifications. When marriage becomes entirely optional instead of mandatory, a conscious choice instead of an economic necessity, when men can thrive, build wealth, and find profound fulfillment without the expected attachment of wives and families, everything changes. The entire social order must reorganize itself around a set of completely new, revolutionary assumptions. Jung theorized about the collective unconscious, the deep, inherited psychic patterns that make certain behaviors feel anciently inevitable. The archetypal patterns that once made marriage feel like a preordained destiny are actively dissolving in the modern psyche. The man who refuses the need for marriage is pioneering new, sustainable patterns of masculine existence. He demonstrates irrevocably that a life can be deeply meaningful, powerful, and complete without adherence to traditional validation metrics. But here's the most powerful consequence. The death of God in relationships does not imply the death of love. It fundamentally means the birth of conscious, self-aware choice in connection. When you are no longer driven by unconscious compulsion, operating from scripts written by desperate previous generations, or conforming to outdated social programming, you gain the capacity to create relationships that were simply impossible under the old, restrictive system. These are relationships built on mutual conscious growth instead of mutual frantic dependency. They are connections based on fierce, authentic choice instead of inherited social obligation. They are partnerships that enhance your already complete life instead of desperately attempting to complete your broken half. The unmarried man who has achieved this consciousness is not a destroyer. He is a prophet of new possibilities. He is not tearing down the old world, he is simply revealing what the new self-sovereign world could look like. And that vision is so profoundly attractive, so filled with genuine freedom, that it compels others to question everything they thought they knew about love, success, and connection. Here is an insight that fundamentally redefines the concept of masculine strength. Real, enduring power is not about the capacity to control others. It is exclusively about the capacity to master yourself. Nietzsche's concept of the will to power has been universally misunderstood as mere domination. But at its highest, most refined expression, it is about relentless self-overcoming, becoming who you authentically are, expressing your inherent nature, and creating your own, self-authored values. The man who does not need marriage has discovered and harnessed this ultimate form of power within himself. Consider the comparison. What is the source of greater, more sustainable strength? Needing someone external to complete your existence or being profoundly complete in yourself? Seeking external validation from a partner or status, or generating your own unshakable sense of self-worth? Most men attempt to gain power through external achievement. A better job, more money, a more attractive partner. This, however, is borrowed, contingent power. It depends entirely on transient external factors outside of your absolute control. The individuated man has discovered a qualitatively different form of power, the power of self-mastery. He has faced the Jungian shadow, all the parts of himself society told him to repress, his independence, his ambition, his deep self-serving focus. Instead of suppressing these qualities, he has integrated them into a coherent, functional whole. This psychological integration creates a genuine strength, not the compensatory, anxious strength of men constantly trying to prove their worth, but the quiet, deep confidence of someone who knows himself completely and accepts what he knows. And the glorious consequence of this self-mastery is that you can now choose relationships from an internal sense of abundance instead of scarcity. You choose from absolute wholeness instead of agonizing neediness. You are not desperately searching for someone to mend you. You are already whole enough to share your fulfilled life with someone who genuinely enhances it. What does it truly mean to be a man in the 21st century? The old inherited definitions are rapidly collapsing, and society has failed to provide functional replacements. This societal breakdown creates a massive identity crisis. A generation of men lost because they don't know who they are supposed to be without the old roles. But here is the profound victory of the self-sufficient man. He has already solved this crisis. He has discovered that fundamental masculinity is not defined by your relationship to external roles or to others. It is defined by the quality of your relationship to yourself. Traditional masculinity defined men through external performance, the provider, the protector, the family man. But what happens when you decide you don't need or want those external roles? What happens when you don't need to be a provider to feel valuable or a protector to feel strong? You discover a revolutionary truth. Your deepest identity exists completely independent of social position or external validation. Nietzsche called this becoming who you are, ruthlessly discarding inherited, inauthentic identities to discover your innate, authentic nature. Jung called it individuation, integrating all disparate aspects of yourself into a cohesive, functional whole. The man who completes this arduous process has no need for social approval to feel valuable. He defines masculinity exclusively by internal, sovereign qualities: strength of character, clarity of vision, creative expression, consciousness, and absolute self-mastery. And here is the deep-seated threat this identity poses to the system. When men realize they can be fundamentally complete and powerful without traditional, collective achievements, they become entirely immune to manipulation tactics predicated on insecurity, shame, and inadequacy. This new autonomous masculine identity does not reject partnership. It completely transforms it. The unmarried man who has achieved this transformation serves as the ultimate compelling model for all others struggling with the crisis of modern identity. He proves that the traditional masculine malaise can be resolved through inner work, not external acquisition, through self-knowledge, not social validation, through authenticity, not mere performance. Once you truly see this possibility, the question shifts from the paralyzing, "What kind of man should I be?" to the liberating realization, "What kind of man am I already?" Here we arrive at the moment of absolute truth. After seeing the intricate ways society manufactures your dependency, after analyzing the strategic difference between authentic desire and inherited social programming, what choice will you make in this very moment? The man who successfully rejects the need for marriage represents more than just a personal lifestyle choice. He stands as a formidable, living question mark that challenges the unconscious assumptions of everyone around him. Are you pursuing a partnership because you genuinely desire the specific person and the unique life they offer? Or because the collective expects you to fill that role? Are you seeking partnership from an internal state of strength and wholeness, or from a desperate, gnawing neediness? Are you consciously choosing your life, or are you sleepwalking through society's script? These questions are not easy, but they are the only ones worth asking. The individuated man has developed what Nietzsche praised above all: the courage to be oneself, the radical willingness to live rigorously according to authentic, self-created values rather than passively accepting inherited, external expectations. His authenticity does not demand that you duplicate his exact choices, but it imposes a sacred challenge. You must shift from making unconscious decisions to making fiercely conscious ones. He demonstrates that partnership can be chosen from strength, never from weakness, from wholeness, never from deficiency, from uncompromised freedom, never from passive obligation. Here is the ultimate power of this realization. When men begin seriously examining their fundamental motivations, questioning their manufactured needs, and discovering their innate capacity for self-completeness, the entire landscape of human connection begins to fundamentally change. Authentic choice generates authentic relationships. Conscious men create conscious, transparent partnerships. Whole individuals create healthy, empowering connections. The man who doesn't need marriage is dangerous, not because he destroys the old world, but because he powerfully illuminates the system's absolute dependence on inauthentic, fear-based choices. His freedom is a rallying cry that calls others to conduct their own ruthless self-examination. to distinguish genuine desire from social programming, and to choose their connections from a place of radical strength, never from weakness. And that collective examination, spurred by his example, is capable of transforming the entire concept of human relationship, creating new possibilities for profound connection based on conscious choice rather than unconscious compulsion, on authentic, internalized desire rather than social programming, on individual sovereignty rather than collective dependency. The ultimate question is not about marriage. It is this: are you brave enough right now to commit to finding out who you truly are, independent of the world's expectations? Your time on this earth is uniquely limited. Your choices are yours to make, and they define your existence. We are committed to building a community of men who choose sovereignty over conformity. If this message resonated with the deepest truth you hold, then I need you to commit to your self-mastery right now. Go into the comments and type this phrase as an act of commitment: I choose sovereignty. Do that right now. And if you are ready to join this ascent to a higher level of consciousness and strength, do not risk losing access to this vital information. Hit the like button to signal your commitment, and subscribe immediately to align yourself with a community that prioritizes authentic power. Because what we have discussed today is only the foundation. In the next part, we will analyze the direct, manipulative tactics society and culture deploy when they recognize they have lost control of a self-sufficient man, the attacks, the shaming, and the ultimate dark reasons why women, specifically, feel compelled to attempt to tame his freedom. Do not miss that critical exploration. The keys to your true, uncompromised power are waiting. He stands in the center of the crowd, completely still, and yet he is the epicenter of a subtle, uncomfortable earthquake. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. He simply stated the truth of his own existence. He is complete, and he does not require the structure society insists upon for validation. This silent declaration, "I don't need to," is not a dismissal of marriage, but an affirmation of self-sufficiency. And that, more than any open rebellion, is the reason the collective gaze turns hostile. They look at him and see not a successful man, but a broken contract, a glitch in the programming. They sense that if his freedom is genuine, then their own security might be nothing more than self-imposed captivity. This profound discomfort, this near-aggressive questioning of his life choices, reveals the terrifying power of a man who has achieved psychological sovereignty. The system depends on your neediness, your perceived lack, and your willingness to buy into the myth of the missing half. When a man eradicates that deficit internally, he doesn't just achieve personal peace, he fractures the foundation of collective dependency. He becomes a living anomaly, a contradiction to the slave morality that insists we are born deficient, requiring external institutions to confer wholeness upon us. The moment he acknowledges his own completeness, he is no longer negotiating for acceptance, but asserting absolute existential freedom, and that is a currency the established order cannot tolerate. This narrative we are exploring today, detailing the mechanisms society uses to punish the complete man, is resonating deeply. I know. It is pulling at the threads of inherited truths many have felt instinctively, but never articulated. I want to know where this conversation is reaching you. Affirm the power of this revelation and share right now in your mind the name of the city you are watching from. Feel the connection of others across the landscape who are also seeing the invisible cages for the first time. Let us delve deeper into the nature of the control mechanism. Nietzsche's dichotomy between the Apollonian, order, structure, predictability, and the Dionysian, chaos, passion, authentic expression, is key to understanding why the unmarried, self-sufficient man is attacked. Marriage, in its traditional societal context, is the ultimate Apollonian framework imposed upon the inherently Dionysian nature of masculine energy. Man is a force of creation, disruption, and risk. He is meant to challenge boundaries, to explore, to redefine his purpose. This chaos, while necessary for progress, is inherently destabilizing to the societal structure built on tax revenues, predictable labor, and generational succession. The societal attack is therefore a defensive order. The single man, thriving and self-contained, retains his Dionysian edge. He can pivot his career without consequence, abandon a location on a whim, dedicate years to an unprofitable passion project, or simply choose to prioritize self-development over consumption. He is essentially high-risk capital in human form. The institution of marriage, however, acts as an invisible cage, transforming the untamed Dionysian spirit into the tamed Apollonian subject. How is this taming achieved? Through the meticulous application of responsibility, not joy. The married man is anchored by mortgages, school zones, insurance premiums, and a necessary adherence to institutional schedules. His potential for chaos is channeled into the highly predictable role of the provider. His inherent will to power, which Nietzsche envisioned as self-mastery and creation, is redirected into the will to provide, a power exerted over material resources for the benefit of dependents. tying his entire identity to his economic utility. He cannot afford the risk of challenging a toxic boss, because he has been conditioned to see risk as a threat to his family's survival, a societal construct expertly woven into his self-worth. The self-sufficient bachelor, in contrast, reveals that this taming is optional. His thriving existence proves that high levels of security and happiness do not require the Apollonian anchor of conventional family structure. He is integrating his Dionysian freedom with Apollonian discipline, success, career, health, achieving a synthesis that society deems unacceptable because it is uncontrollable. His freedom is a constant, subtle critique of the man who chose security out of fear, rather than choosing partnership out of genuine, conscious desire. And because the controlled man cannot admit he is controlled, he must attack the free man to validate his own chains. The attack against the man who doesn't need marriage is driven less by social dogma and more by sheer, measurable economics. We discussed briefly the wedding industrial complex, but the truth runs deeper, touching the very metabolism of the modern capitalist state. The core necessity of our current economic model is sustained, predictable consumption. The single man who has achieved individuation, the psychological wholeness Jung described, becomes a radically efficient consumer. He buys what he needs, invests wisely, and consumes based on authentic desire, not manufactured inadequacy. He is immune to marketing campaigns that target insecurity because his self-worth is internally generated. His purchasing decisions are autonomous, driven by value, not status performance intended to attract or retain a mate. The married unit, however, is the engine of predictable debt and consumption. They require a larger domicile, mortgage debt, more vehicles, auto loans, constant expenditures on children, education, activities, and higher insurance brackets. Furthermore, and most critically, the married man is psychologically bound to a higher level of career compliance. His debt load dictates his risk tolerance. He cannot easily strike, quit, or start a competitive business. He is guaranteed to be a compliant wage slave for the long haul, thereby sustaining the corporate and governmental tax base. The self-sufficient bachelor undermines this entire structure. If men universally achieved this state of autonomy, consuming only what serves their true values, the stock market reliant on manufactured desire and perpetual upgrade cycles would shudder. The man who prioritizes self-mastery over external status symbols is economically dangerous. He redirects his immense will-to-power energy from accumulating material goods for display toward accumulating internal capital, skills, knowledge, resilience, and personal freedom. When society attacks this man, it is not merely moral censure. It is economic blackmail dressed up as concern. They are attempting to shame him back into the cycle of high consumption and compliance. They want him back on the treadmill, running toward the consumer goals they dictate. His quiet withdrawal from this performance is an act of economic subversion, proving that the most profitable subject is the one who believes he is incomplete and therefore constantly requires things external to himself to justify his existence. This revelation, that your perceived neediness is someone else's profit margin, is powerful enough to dismantle lifelong assumptions about financial success and personal happiness. Carl Jung's process of individuation is the psychological roadmap to the status the self-sufficient man achieves. This process involves confronting and integrating the repressed parts of the self, the shadow, and integrating the opposite gender archetype within, the anima for men. Society attacks this man because he has completed this terrifying internal journey, removing the need for external completion. The attack often focuses on projecting loneliness, selfishness, or emotional stuntedness onto the bachelor. He must hate women, or he's too afraid of commitment, or he will die alone. These are not analyses. They are desperate projections of the dependent person's own fear of isolation. They rely on the cultural script that requires a woman to activate a man's emotional depth, his anima. But the individuated man has done the work internally. He has faced his shadow, acknowledged his capacity for independence and self-interest, and integrated his own emotional landscape. He is nurturing, intuitive, and capable of deep connection without requiring another person to be the external container for those qualities. This is the definition of psychological sovereignty. He is no longer seeking a partner to make him whole. He is whole, and thus capable of choosing a relationship from a position of abundance. Here is the essential danger of this wholeness. The individuated man's presence exposes codependency in others. When a dependent person encounters someone who is genuinely complete, the dependent person's strategies for validation and connection cease to work. They can't manipulate him through guilt because he has resolved his shadow. They can't bind him through neediness because he possesses self-mastery. His very presence forces those around him to confront their own internal deficits, the voids they hoped external relationships would fill. The psychological sovereignty of the man who doesn't need marriage is therefore a radical act of transparency. It reveals the uncomfortable truth that many marriages are not unions of two whole people choosing to share their abundance, but rather systems of mutual dependency built on shared scarcity and fear of loneliness. This revelation is profoundly destabilizing to the collective unconscious, which prefers the comfortable lie of mutual incompleteness. The attack is thus a frantic effort by the dependent majority to neutralize the beacon of self-reliance, lest its light reveal the shaky foundation of their own structures. Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, often mistranslated as Superman, better understood as Overman or self-overcomer, is the ultimate philosophical framework for the man who doesn't need marriage. The Übermensch is not defined by superior social status, but by his revolutionary act of creating his own values, standing outside the inherited moral structures of the past. The man who rejects the mandatory nature of marriage is committing this existential act. He is not saying marriage is evil. He is saying, the value you assign to marriage as a mandatory step for completion is a value I reject. I will create my own metric for a successful life. This is the ultimate sin against slave morality, which demands conformity to established inherited values. The collective system needs you to accept the script handed down by tradition, religion, and culture. It needs you to believe that the rules were discovered, not invented. The self-sufficient bachelor, by contrast, proves that life success can be achieved outside the pre-approved sequence. He has applied Nietzsche's most profound test to his life, the concept of eternal recurrence. The test asks, if you had to live this exact life with all its joys and sorrows over and over again for eternity, would you choose it? The man who chooses singleness from a position of strength is essentially saying, I choose this life right now, completely as it is, and I would choose it infinitely. He is affirming his autonomous existence. Many men who marry out of obligation or social pressure fail this test immediately. They choose their life because they feel they have to, hoping the next chapter will fix the dissatisfaction of the current one. They are constantly looking forward, unwilling to affirm the present. Their life is an expression of resentment against their perceived fate. The man who doesn't need marriage, however, affirms his fate, amor fati. He accepts his totality, his current solitude, his freedom, and his responsibility for his self-created values. His existence is a terrifying challenge because it demonstrates that the social contract is entirely negotiable. If you can create your own values around marriage, where else can you reject the inherited script? Can you create your own values around money, career, loyalty, and morality? The answer, demonstrated by his freedom, is yes. And a society built on predictable conformity cannot survive when its subjects realize they are the authors of their own value systems. This sovereignty is what society truly attacks. Not his relationship status, but his self-created meaning. They attack the Übermensch in him, the person who dares to become who he truly is, outside the boundaries of the inherited script. They attack the existential courage required to stand alone and say, my value is inherent, not conferred. We have peeled back layers of social conditioning, economic engineering, and psychological manipulation designed to keep men dependent and controllable. You now understand that the attack on the self-sufficient man is simply the defense mechanism of a system built on your insecurity. This knowledge grants you immediate power, the power of conscious choice. This is the time for action. You are realizing that the greatest power is not found in the validation of others, but in the affirmation of your own existence. This journey of individuation is the ultimate act of will. Share this realization with others who are fighting the same battle. I need you to anchor this truth right now. You are conscious. You are sovereign. You are choosing your path. In the comment section below, you must drop the phrase that summarizes this newfound power. Use a strong, affirmative phrase that declares your self-mastery. For example, my worth is internal, or the sovereign man chooses. I need you to commit to this choice. Put your intention into the comments and let the world know where you stand. And listen closely. The men who understand this are few. You are joining an elite group who recognize the invisible script. You must solidify this connection. Hit the subscribe button and click the notification bell to ensure you never miss a lesson on true self-mastery and freedom. Like this video to amplify this truth, connecting us all in the pursuit of genuine consciousness. This journey is not over. We have analyzed the attack and the philosophy behind the threat. But the next stage is critical. We must now turn our focus to the practical strategies for maintaining this sovereignty in a world that aggressively demands your conformity. You are about to discover the specific steps necessary to fortify your mind and your life against the constant pressure to conform. Prepare yourself for the third and final part of this series, where we detail how the sovereign man translates philosophical freedom into daily, uncompromising action. This final analysis will change not only how you think but how you live, forever. This unmarried man is society's greatest threat. He's 35, successful, and he walks into a family gathering. He's got his life together, career thriving, bank account healthy, friends who respect him. But there's one thing missing according to everyone around him. When are you getting married? Here's what's interesting. He doesn't get defensive. He doesn't make excuses. He simply says, "I don't need to." And that response, it makes people uncomfortable. Really uncomfortable. This refusal, stated with calm certainty, is not merely a social slight. It is a declaration of spiritual autonomy that shakes the foundations of the collective. Why does a man who doesn't need marriage scare society so much? Because he's living proof that everything you've been told about what makes a man complete might be fundamentally, dangerously wrong. Think about it. From childhood, men are programmed with a simple message: get married, settle down, find a wife. That's what real men do. But what if that's not actually about your happiness? What if it's about keeping you predictable, manageable, and confined within the narrow economic parameters defined by others? The pressure is not a sign of care, but a mechanism of control, designed to shepherd the individual will back into the pen of collective expectation. The truth is, a married man is a controlled man. He's got responsibilities, bills to pay, a family to provide for. He can't just quit his job and travel the world. He can't take radical risks. He stays in line because the cost of deviation is too high, tethered as he is to external dependence. But the unmarried man who truly doesn't need marriage, he's dangerous. Not because he hates women or relationships, which is the comfortable narrative society constructs, but because he is free. And freedom, in its purest, most psychological form, is the most corrosive acid against collective illusions. When other men see him thriving without the prescribed societal leash, they start asking dangerous questions that unravel years of cultural conditioning. Do I really need this structure? Am I married because I want to be, or because I was told I should be? The famous philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche talked about people who create their own rules instead of following society's rules. He called them the Übermensch, the overman, not a superior being but a self-mastered individual. They don't need approval from others to feel valuable because they are the sole source of their own value. And psychologist Carl Jung discovered that when a man truly knows himself, including his shadow side, integrating the rejected aspects of his personality, he becomes complete on his own. He doesn't need someone else to make him whole. He achieves individuation. This man isn't anti-marriage. He's pro-choice. Not the fake choice between marry or be a failure, but the genuine choice between marry because I want to, from a position of wholeness, or stay single because I am already complete. That choice terrifies a world built on your engineered neediness. Before we dive deeper into the terrifying consequence of this self-mastery, I want to know where this message is resonating. Tell me the city you are watching from. We are building a global community dedicated to authentic self-discovery, and understanding the spread of this consciousness is crucial. Here's something that will blow your mind. You've been programmed to believe you're broken. Think about it. Since you were a kid, what message did you hear over and over? You need to find your other half. You're not complete without someone. A real man settles down. But what if I told you this is exactly what they want you to believe? Nietzsche called this slave morality, the inversion of values where self-reliance is pathologized and dependency is celebrated as virtue. It is the insidious idea that you're inherently deficient and need external validation, often through social constructs like marriage, to be whole. It's genius, really. If you believe you're incomplete, you'll spend your entire life desperately trying to fill that void. And guess what? A man desperately seeking completion is a man who can be controlled, sold products, and kept within predictable behavioral patterns. The hidden truth, understood by Jungian analysis, is that there's a part of your psyche called the anima, your inner feminine energy, encompassing emotion, intuition, and connection. Society teaches men to project this vital energy onto women instead of developing it themselves. Why? Because when you integrate this part of yourself, achieving the psychological marriage of opposites, you become truly complete. You don't need anyone else to access the full spectrum of human experience. The man who discovers this becomes dangerous. Not violently dangerous, but psychologically dangerous. He can't be shamed into marriage, guilted into settling down, or manipulated through the threat of loneliness, because he has resolved the internal split. Watch what happens when you tell people you don't need marriage to be complete. They get angry. They get defensive. They start listing all the reasons you're wrong, attempting to reassert the dominance of the social script. But here's what's truly happening. You're threatening their entire worldview. If you can be complete without marriage, what does that say about the foundation of their choices? Perhaps made from fear or necessity. The truth is, when you stop seeking external validation and start building internal strength, true, non-contingent strength, you transform from someone who needs relationships to someone who chooses them. And choice, derived from self-mastery, is what they're really afraid of. Because a man who chooses from strength can also choose to walk away. And that terrifies a system built on keeping you dependent and compliant. Want to know a secret that will make you angry? Your feelings of incompleteness aren't natural. They're manufactured. There's a massive industry worth billions that depends on you feeling inadequate without a wife. The wedding industry alone is staggering, but it goes deeper than that. Real estate companies target couples because they spend more, driven by joint accelerating need. Insurance companies create family plans because married men buy more coverage, motivated by the fear of loss. The entire consumer economy is built around the idea that you need to provide for someone else, thereby escalating your consumption and ensuring your subservience to the corporate ladder. But here's what's crazy. The man who doesn't need marriage sees right through this manipulation. He realizes that most of his major spending was driven by the urgent need to prove he was provider material, worthy of selection. The fancy car, the bigger apartment, the expensive restaurants, all of it was performance, a desperate attempt to signal competency, not genuine desire flowing from authentic selfhood. Nietzsche talked about the will to power, but not power over others, rather, power over yourself. When you redirect that enormous energy from impressing others to rigorously developing yourself, something incredible happens. You stop consuming out of insecurity and start living from authenticity. Think about the last time you made a major purchase, one that seemed necessary for status. Was it because you genuinely valued the item, or because you thought it would make you more attractive, stable, or successful in the eyes of potential partners or rivals? The man who has integrated his psychology, who has achieved individuation, makes decisions based on his actual distilled values, not manufactured needs engineered by marketers. And this terrifies the economic system because if men stop buying things to impress women, stop upgrading their lifestyles to seem like superior providers, stop consuming to fill the void of incompleteness, the entire economy would have to reorganize around what people actually want, instead of what they are systematically conditioned to think they need. That's why they keep telling you you're incomplete. Your insecurity, your lack of self-mastery, is their indispensable profit margin. Here's something nobody talks about. You have a dark side, and society is terrified of what happens when you embrace it. Jung called it the shadow. All the parts of yourself you've been taught to hide, repress, or deny. Your selfishness, your radical independence, your refusal to conform, your desire to put your own developmental path first. Most men spend their entire lives running from these aspects of themselves. They get married partly to prove they're good guys, who can sacrifice perpetually for others, ensuring they can safely deny their own fierce self-interest. But what if I told you that embracing your shadow is the essential key to becoming complete? The man who doesn't need marriage has done something most men never do. He's faced his dark side honestly. He's acknowledged that yes, he can be selfish in defense of his time and energy. Yes, he values his existential independence above all else. Yes, he is not always willing to sacrifice his mission for others' convenience. And instead of being ashamed of these qualities, he's integrated them into a coherent, powerful self. Here's what's wild. When you stop running from your shadow, when you consciously incorporate the monster within, you stop needing external validation to prove your goodness. You are no longer performing virtue to prove you're worthy of love. You are simply complete in your complexity. There's another piece to this existential puzzle, the anima, the feminine principle within every man. Most men project this onto women, thinking, she completes me, she is my emotional half. But when you integrate your anima into your self-image, you become psychologically whole. You don't need a woman to access your emotional depth, your intuition, or your capacity for nurturing and introspection. You've developed these qualities within yourself, becoming a fully realized human being, rather than a half-man seeking his external complement. This integration is what Nietzsche meant by amor fati, the love of one's fate, the radical acceptance of one's complete nature, including the parts society emphatically told you were wrong or undesirable. And when you achieve this, something incredible happens. You become utterly immune to manipulation. Society can't shame you into marriage because you're not ashamed of being single. They can't guilt you into over-providing because you're not guilty about prioritizing your self-actualization. You've become psychologically free. And that freedom, witnessed by others, is profoundly contagious. Other men see you and start asking with profound hope and fear, wait, I can be complete on my own? I don't have to play this game? Picture two types of men. The tamed man. Structured, predictable, safe. He has a mortgage, a wife, a 5-year plan. What Nietzsche, drawing loosely on Greek archetypes, might call Apollonian, representing order and control. The wild man. Unpredictable, creative, free. He can change continents on a whim, pivot careers, takes existential risks. Dionysian, representing chaos, passion, and authentic, untamed expression. Guess which one society prefers and rewards? Here's the critical truth. Marriage, as a rigid social institution, is designed to turn Dionysian men into purely Apollonian ones. It channels your dangerous, wild, creative energy into standardized, socially acceptable forms. Your potent creativity gets funneled exclusively into providing. Your radical independence gets transformed into rigid, obligated responsibility. But what happens to the man who refuses this mandatory transformation? He keeps his edge. He stays dangerous. Not violently dangerous, but unpredictably, creatively free. Think about it. Can you quit your job tomorrow and travel the world seeking a profound experience? Can you pivot your entire life trajectory without considering someone else's entrenched needs? Can you access your creative chaos whenever your soul demands it? If you are bound by the conventional script, the answer is almost certainly no. And that's exactly the objective of the system. The unmarried man who has achieved individuation has done something remarkable. He's integrated both sides of himself. He can be structured when necessary and wild when beneficial, responsible when needed and rebellious when required. He is a gentleman at dinner and a fierce warrior in the marketplace, nurturing with his friends and ruthlessly effective in pursuing his destiny. He's not trapped in either extreme. He is the sovereign master of both. Society fears this profound integration because it can't predict it or, crucially, control it. The conventionally married man often loses access to his Dionysian nature. He becomes purely Apollonian, safe, predictable, controlled. But the integrated bachelor has retained his essential wildness while developing profound wisdom. This supreme flexibility makes him incredibly powerful. And power that cannot be controlled, power derived solely from self-mastery, is power that threatens the entire system. Here's a question that will change everything. Who decided that marriage was necessary for a complete life? Think about it. Really think about it. When you trace back the rules about what makes a successful man, where do they originate? Your parents, society, religion, the media. But what if those rules are just inherited opinions, rigidified into dogma? Nietzsche talked about the Übermensch, precisely because they refuse to inherit values. They create their own. The man who doesn't need marriage is living proof that this act of existential creation is possible. He's not rejecting marriage because it's inherently wrong. He's rejecting the dangerous, crippling idea that it's mandatory for his wholeness. See the difference? Most men evaluate marriage like this. I should get married because that's what successful good men do. But the value-creating man asks, does marriage serve my authentic development and deepest desires? Same decision point, completely different. Self-sovereign framework. And this is what terrifies people. Because if you can create your own values around marriage, what other core social rules are actually just brittle suggestions? Jung's individuation process is about becoming who you truly are, not who society says you should be. When you complete this process, you can evaluate every life choice, including marriage, based purely on your authentic self, your destiny, rather than social programming. Imagine if every man started asking, would I choose this marriage, this specific life arrangement, to live it over and over again for all eternity? That is Nietzsche's eternal recurrence test. Make choices as if you will repeat them infinitely. How many marriages, entered into out of fear or necessity, would survive that brutal test of authenticity? The man who doesn't need marriage has already passed it. He's looked at his life honestly and decided, I'd rather be alone and true to myself than settle for less than a genuine, growth-enhancing connection. This isn't about being anti-marriage. It's about being radically pro-choice, pro-authenticity. When you see a man who has created his own values, lives by his own standards, measures success by his own metrics, you're witnessing something profoundly rare, authentic human freedom. And that freedom is so powerful, so attractive, so fundamentally inspiring that it makes others question every aspect of their own prescribed choices. That's why he's dangerous. He's not destroying society. He's showing that alternative self-authored ways of living are possible, and indeed, essential for psychological health. Quick question. How much of your daily life is performance? Jung profoundly distinguished between the persona, the social mask you wear in public to fit in, and your authentic self. Most men spend so much time performing the hyper-masculine provider role that they forget what they actually want, or even who they are when the mask comes off. The persona of masculinity dictates, real men get married, real men provide, real men sacrifice their personal destiny for others. But what if your authentic self wants something radically different? Here's what's fascinating. The man who doesn't need marriage has done the inner work to ruthlessly distinguish between these two aspects of himself. He's asked the hard, isolating question, am I living my life or society's script? Most men marry to fulfill the demands of the persona. They think, this is what I'm supposed to do. But they never pause to ask, is this what I genuinely, authentically want? The individuated man has navigated what Jung called the dark night of the soul, periods of agonizing isolation and rigorous self-examination that most people avoid through constant activity, endless relationships, and perpetual distraction. And through that necessary darkness, he discovered something incredible. He can be complete without external validation. Think about this. When was the last time you made a major life decision based purely on what you wanted, not what others expected? The authentic man lives from his true, deeply excavated desires, not manufactured needs. He might choose marriage, but from a position of insurmountable strength, not weakness. from wholeness, not chronic engineered neediness. Everything you were taught about how life works is presently falling apart. Nietzsche predicted this profound cultural shift when he declared, "God is dead." He wasn't talking merely about religious faith. He was talking about the irreversible collapse of the foundational authority structures, religious, moral, and social, that once told people exactly how to live, how to find meaning, and what their life purpose must be. And nowhere is this death of authority more glaringly obvious than in the institution of marriage. Your grandfather got married because, frankly, he had to. Social pressure was overwhelming, economic necessity was absolute, and religious obligation was binding. The choice, for all practical purposes, was made for him by the collective unconscious. But you today are living in the first generation that can truly existentially choose whether or not to partake in this institution. And that radical, unprecedented freedom terrifies society. Think about it. When marriage becomes optional instead of mandatory, a conscious choice instead of a historical necessity, when men can thrive, prosper, and achieve psychological completion without wives, everything changes. The entire social order has to reorganize around completely new voluntary assumptions. Jung talked about the collective unconscious, deep inherited patterns that make certain behaviors feel inevitable or archetypally correct. The archaic patterns that once made marriage feel like destiny are dissolving under the acid of consciousness. The man who doesn't need marriage is pioneering new patterns of relating. He's showing that life can be deeply meaningful, purposeful, and complete without traditional external validation. But here's what's really happening. The death of God in relationships doesn't mean the death of love. It means the powerful birth of conscious choice. When you're no longer driven by unconscious compulsions, scripts written by previous generations, or manipulative social programming, you can create relationships that were utterly impossible under the old system. Relationships based on mutual growth and enhancement, instead of mutual dependency and completion. Connections based on conscious self-aware choice instead of social obligation. Partnerships that enhance your already whole life instead of desperately attempting to complete your broken one. The unmarried man who has achieved this consciousness is a prophet of new possibilities. He's not destroying the old world. He's revealing what the new world of authentic human connection could look like. And that vision, rooted in sovereignty and strength, is so attractive that it makes others question everything they thought they knew about relationships, purpose, and self-worth. Here's something that will fundamentally change how you see yourself. Real power isn't about controlling others. It is, eternally, about mastering yourself. Nietzsche's will to power has been completely misunderstood. It's not about domination over others. It's about becoming who you truly are, expressing your highest, most authentic nature, and creating your own self-generated values. The man who doesn't need marriage has discovered this inexhaustible power source within himself. Think about it. What is truly stronger? Needing someone else to complete you or being irrevocably complete in yourself? Seeking external validation from others, or rigorously generating your own inviolable sense of self-worth? Most men try to find power through external achievement. A better job, more money, a traditionally attractive wife. But this is borrowed power. It depends entirely on things outside your direct control, things that can be lost in an instant. The individuated man has found a different kind of power, the magnificent power of self-mastery. He's faced the Jungian shadow, all the parts of himself society told him to hide, his ambition, his independence, his refusal to settle. Instead of being ashamed of these qualities, he's integrated them into a functional whole. This integration creates genuine, profound strength, not the fragile, compensatory strength of men trying to prove themselves, but the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone who knows himself completely and accepts his own destiny. Amor fati. And here's what's incredible. When you achieve this ultimate self-mastery, you can choose relationships from abundance instead of scarcity, from wholeness instead of neediness. You are not desperately seeking someone to complete you. You are whole enough to share your already rich sovereign life with someone who enhances it, but whose presence is never a necessity for your survival. What does it mean to be a man today? The old definitions are collapsing, and society has failed spectacularly to provide meaningful replacements. This creates what psychologists call an identity crisis. Millions of men who don't know what they're supposed to be. But here's what's revolutionary. The man who doesn't need marriage has solved this crisis internally. He's discovered that masculinity isn't about your relationships to others, your roles as husband, father, provider. It is fundamentally about your relationship to yourself. Traditional masculinity defined men through external functional roles. But what happens when you don't want or need those roles? What happens when you don't need to be a provider to feel valuable, or a protector to feel strong? You discover something revolutionary. Your deepest identity exists independently of any social position. Nietzsche called this becoming who you are, discarding inherited, limiting identities to discover your authentic nature. Jung called it individuation. integrating all aspects of yourself into a coherent, self-sustaining whole. The man who completes this arduous process doesn't need social approval to feel valuable. He defines masculinity by internal qualities: strength of character, radical creative expression, profound consciousness, absolute authenticity, and self-mastery. And here's what's profoundly threatening about this evolution. When men realize they can be complete without external, traditional achievements, they become utterly immune to manipulation tactics based on insecurity. And this new masculine identity doesn't reject relationships, it transforms them entirely. The unmarried man who has achieved this transformation serves as a model for others struggling with the current identity crisis. He proves that traditional masculine crises can be resolved through inner work, not external acquisition, through self-knowledge, not social validation, through authenticity, not performance. And once you see this powerful possibility, you realize the question isn't what kind of man should I be? It is instead, what kind of man am I already, beneath the layers of expectation? Here's the moment of truth. After everything you've learned, after seeing how subtly society manipulates your core choices, after understanding the profound, critical difference between authentic desire and inherited social programming, what are you going to do next? The man who doesn't need marriage represents more than just a personal choice. He's a living, breathing question mark that challenges everyone around him to wake up. Are you married because you genuinely want to be? Because it serves your authentic destiny? Or because society expects it and provides a convenient script? Are you seeking partnership from a position of core strength or from crippling neediness? Are you choosing your life? Or are you sleepwalking through society's pre-written script? These are not comfortable questions, but they are absolutely necessary for your spiritual health and psychological freedom. The individuated man has developed Nietzsche's supreme psychological ideology, the courage to be himself, the fierce willingness to live according to authentic, self-generated values, rather than passively accepting inherited expectations. His powerful authenticity does not require you to make the same choice of solitude, but it demands that you make conscious choices instead of unconscious ones. He shows that marriage can be chosen from strength, not weakness, from wholeness, not neediness, from profound freedom, not crippling obligation. And here's what is ultimately powerful. When men begin examining their deepest motivations, questioning their manufactured needs, and discovering their innate sovereign capacity for completeness, things start to change dramatically, not just for them, but for everyone they interact with. Because authentic choice creates authentic relationships. Conscious men create conscious partnerships. Whole individuals create healthy, enhancing connections. The man who doesn't need marriage is dangerous not because he destroys society, but because he reveals society's deep dependence on inauthentic choices and fear-based compliance. His freedom calls others to immediately examine their own lives, to ruthlessly distinguish between genuine desires and social programming, and to choose partnership, if they choose it at all, from a position of strength rather than desperate weakness. And that immediate, urgent examination, that internal revolution, will transform the entire landscape of human relationships, creating new possibilities for authentic connection, based solely on conscious choice rather than unconscious compulsion, based on individual sovereignty rather than collective dependency. The question is, are you brave enough to find out who you really are, before the external world tells you who you should be? Your time is limited. Your choices are yours to make, not inherited burdens to carry. The question is not whether you should or shouldn't marry. It is whether you are choosing from your authentic, sovereign self, or from society's predictable script. The man who doesn't need marriage has already made his choice. Now it is your turn to claim your philosophical sovereignty. Declare your choice by affirming your highest potential in the comments right now. Write this phrase: I choose my own values. This affirmation connects you instantly to the community of self-mastery we are building. We recognize the immense value this profound exploration holds for your personal liberation. If this deep dive into self-sovereignty is resonating, join this movement of conscious men right now. Your subscription ensures that this path to authentic power continues to be illuminated for you, providing the precise tools you need for genuine self-mastery. Hit the like button to signal that this necessary knowledge is essential and must be spread to other men seeking their own completion. And because the journey of individuation is continuous, you need to know what comes next. In our upcoming discussion, we are breaking down the psychological barriers that prevent men from fully embracing this newfound freedom, analyzing the precise fears that keep you tied to the approval of others. You must not miss the next step in becoming the sovereign man.